Hi, Cozy Hobby friends. Today I am excited to share more about how I keep up in my reading/media journal. The reason why I decided to start this is because I wanted to remember more of what I read and watched. I don't know if this happens to you, but for me, a lot of the times, right after I finish reading a book or watching a TV show or movie, I immediately forget what happened. I couldn't even tell you the main characters or explain what I just read or watched to a friend. And to me, that is a huge problem. I just spent all of that time consuming the content and now I have nothing to show for it. It feels bad. So this journal was born out of a desire for myself to be a more conscious consumer so that I can either talk about what I read or watched with other people or just be able to remember things for myself. Now let's actually take a look in here and see the ways that my note-taking has evolved and has changed with the way that I've experimented with using this journal. I started off by just taking very extensive book notes. So in this book, I tried to take notes. This book, I tried to take notes just about the characters, themes, etc., even trying to use a key. But what I realized is I actually really don't like doing such kind of deep annotations for books that I'm reading just for fun. After reading this fanfic, I realized I had a lot of things to say, so that's when I started doing reflective journaling on the books that I read. And this was a way that I discovered I really enjoyed interacting with the book and then being able to reflect on my own opinions about the book after I was done. This method of journaling for me is very free-flowing. I just write down whatever comes to mind, things that I felt were really poignant in the book that I was reading, and also things that I didn't like as well. This is an example of a comic that I started to read and was also taking very extensive book notes on, trying to understand the world that was being built here. But in the end, what I discovered was I enjoy just writing quick little character sheets about main characters and people that I need to know about. And then I moved on to just writing about certain quotes that really stuck out to me and my reactions to those quotes. This was a lot more enjoyable for me than trying to really dig into the text and trying to figure things out like a scientist or something, because this, for me, is a hobby. It should be enjoyable. I should really like doing this. And this method that I had discovered, which is just writing about things that stood out to me, is a lot more fun. So usually I start off my reviews by just writing a summary of what the book was about. That just helps cement to me the book that I had just read and gives me a way to talk about it with other people if I want. And then I just go into talking about whatever comes to mind. Characters that I liked, plot points that I liked or didn't like. This feels to me like talking to a friend about this really awesome book or not awesome book that I just read, and do I recommend it or not? And then I would always end with a couple of quotes. I have started to write more about my reactions to the quotes, but since this was one of my first book reviews, I just wrote down some quotes that I really liked. The way I take notes can be different depending on whether it's a fiction book or nonfiction book. Here's an example of a nonfiction book. And what I did here was I just wrote down quotes that stood out to me or even facts that stood out to me. And then below it, I would write down my own thoughts, like why this quote stood out to me, what is my response to that, and also writing down where this quote was from. I took extensive notes on this book because this was the book that we had chosen for book club. So as you can see, I just have a lot of notes about this particular book here. But there was also a lot of really interesting stuff. And I ended it, even more book notes, by writing my own book review. This one is a little bit more structured. So I started off by just writing a summary and then talking about what I liked, what could have been better, aka what I didn't like, favorite quotes, and then how the book changed me. This is kind of like the application section where after I read a book, or especially a nonfiction book, I want to have that tie back into my life in some way. So this was a way that I really enjoyed writing nonfiction book reviews, and I might do that for the next nonfiction book that I read. But for fiction books, I just do whatever I want. For example, I read this bonkers book called Julie Chan is Dead. I had some first impressions after reading about halfway through, and then after finishing the entire book, I wrote my final review. And this definitely is much more freeform, less structured. I just wrote down whatever came to mind. I've also been doing that with things that I watch. It's less structured than my nonfiction book review. And in this case, I also liked to note down what are my favorite songs from this movie. For this fiction book, I also tried to follow the more structured reviews where I write a summary, what I liked, what could have been better, and a conclusion. But I realized I just don't really like doing that for fiction books. For fiction, I just love writing whatever comes to my mind, whatever I love. For example, after I finished Atmosphere, I just had so much to say. And looking back on this, it is a little bit harder to find the things that I liked, find what I didn't like, unlike, a more structured review. But I guess that's why you just go back and reread your own stuff. Maybe one day when I'm bored, I will go back and reread my reviews and what I thought about during that time. In this review was when I started reflecting on my favorite quotes, which I think I really want to continue doing, because writing down a quote, yes, it's fine, it's beautiful language, but I want to write down why this quote moved me, or why did it stand out to me, or even ways that I can relate to it in my own life. So that part I really enjoyed and want to keep doing. So far, I found this to be a practice that I want to continue doing because it brings me joy. I enjoy writing about the books that I just read or the movies that I've just seen. It almost feels like a proper conclusion or end to that piece of media that I had consumed, and a nice time capsule for me to come back at a later date to see what I thought at the time, because I date all of my entries. Now, if you're interested in trying to keep something like this, I'd be happy to give you some advice. One thing is, don't be afraid to try different journaling methods. As you saw in my own journal, I tried several different things before I finally landed on a format and method that I really enjoyed and worked for me. So yeah, don't forget that at the end of the day, this should be fun. This should be something that you enjoy and shouldn't feel like homework or a drag. I'm trying to keep this up in such a way that is sustainable and something that I look forward to doing, not something that I feel like I have to do. So sometimes I have books that I don't finish and I just don't write a review because I'm not excited about it. The only exception to that was this one book here where I didn't finish this, but I felt like I had to write a review because this was a book club book. And so I had to explain to myself and to other people what I didn't like about the book and why I stopped reading it. The other thing is each entry doesn't have to have the same layout. As you can see, some of my book reviews are very free-form and free-flowing. Other ones are a little bit more structured, and other ones I'm just taking book notes. And here's a note on taking notes. You don't have to write down every single piece of new information that you learn, because that might just be you copying down the entire book. But for me, what I learned was, let's just write down the things that I had a response to, things that I had either an emotional or logical response to that I can then write about beneath the quote. So I am still experimenting and trying different things out with my media journal. I've definitely written more book reviews than TV or movie reviews. I did a couple of those, like right here. And as you can see, it's also very free form. But the fun part for me is I get to still experiment with ways that I want to write about different kinds of media that I consume. Other things that I'm thinking about writing about are maybe podcasts, ones that I learn something from and have a response to. I would love to write down my thoughts on those. And also, once again, experimenting with different layouts and structures for different kinds of media. Do you keep a reading or media journal? If you do, I would love to see it. Thanks for watching, and I will talk to you next time.